In this movie, we're going to run through every single one of the 10 Pathfinder operations, both the really great ones that we'll come back to in future movies and the really weird ones that we'll never talk about again. But I just want you to know how they all work. So I'll start off by selecting the upper left shapes here, and then I'll go to the window menu and choose the Pathfinder command to bring up the Pathfinder panel. Now, we're going to be visiting this panel an awful lot over the course of this chapter, so I'm going to move it over into the big panel group by dragging inside this empty gray area right next to the word Pathfinder and dropping the whole group of panels above the layers panel like so. Now, the 10 Pathfinder operations are organized into 4 shape modes, all of which are really great, very useful, and 6 Pathfinders down here, a couple of which are pretty darn useful, and the rest of which I never use, I have to admit. All right, so we'll start things off with Unite, which goes ahead and merges the shapes together. You can see that it's resulted in a compound path up here in the control panel. It has one group of fills and strokes, and it lifts those fill and stroke attributes from the farthest forward shape. All right, next I'll select the second group of shapes. You can see that it includes an additional shape in the form of this smaller yellow square. And that's because our next operation, minus front, subtracts all of the forward shapes from a single rear shape in order to produce this effect here. So we're subtracting both the yellow ring and the yellow square from the red square in the background. And we end up with this group of shapes. And Pathfinder operations will produce groups when the paths are separated from each other, as they are in this case. So I'll just go ahead and press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac to ungroup them. And you can see that we've got this sliver, this one here, and the larger piece of the square in the background, all of which took their fill and stroke attributes from the rearmost shape. All right, next I'll select the third group of shapes, and I'll go to the third mode, which is Intersect, and click on it. And you can see that we end up just keeping the area of the 2 shapes that intersected. I'll select the fourth group and switch to Exclude. Exclude is exactly the opposite of Intersect. So the intersecting area goes away, and just the areas that did not intersect remain intact. Now, even though Exclude has assigned the yellow fill and the black stroke from the forward ring, all 3 of these shapes are separate from each other. So we've got a group, as we can see in the control panel. If you press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on a Mac, and then click off the shapes, then you can drag them separately of each other because they are all independent shapes. So in other words, it has produced a static collection of fragmented shapes. All right, next we're moving to the Pathfinders, that is the group of operations on the bottom row. I'll go ahead and select this first group of shapes in the second row, and then I'll click on Divide, which is probably the best of this second row of options. When you click on it, you go ahead and keep the fill and stroke attributes that were originally assigned to those shapes, but you divide them up according to how the shapes are intersecting. Now, I once again have a group, so I'll press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on a Mac in order to ungroup the shapes, and then I'll separate them apart a little bit so you can see what's going on. And not only do we have all the independent paths that you see here, we have one invisible one that's right about there that looks kind of like a Pac-Man that is rolled backward. I'll go ahead and press the D key in order to assign it the default colors. And just so you can better see it, I'll send these couple of shapes to the back of the stack there by pressing Control-Shift left bracket or Command-Shift left bracket on the Mac. All right, now I'll select this next group of shapes, and I'll click on the next Pathfinder, which is Trim. Trim and some of the other Pathfinder operations here, for some reason, go ahead and throw away the strokes that are assigned to the shapes. And it uses the forward shape in order to trim a hole in the shape below it. So I'll press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac to, once again, ungroup these shapes so that I can move them apart like so. And we've got a full circle, and you can see the only thing that survived intact is the ring, but we also have a little Pac-Man, once again, that I'll go ahead and bring to the top of the stack so that we can see it. All right, next, we've got Merge. I'll select this group of shapes here. And the reason I've got this square inset inside the yellow ring is because I want you to see Merge is a lot like Unite, except that it merges the shapes based on their fills. So as soon as I click on Merge, you can see it's gone ahead and merged the yellow square along with the yellow ring. And we've got quite a few shapes this time around. I'll press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac to ungroup these guys. And I'll go ahead and click on this guy and send him to the back of the stack so that you can see that, let's see, how do I go about best selecting these guys? I'll drag around them like so, and then shift click on that guy to deselect him and these 2 guys as well. and then I'll press the D key so that you can see that we've got all these little shapes to work with. All right, next, I'll select this group of shapes here, and we've got crop. Crop uses a forward shape to crop the shapes in back of it and ends up producing this effect here. So I'll press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on a Mac in order to ungroup these guys. I'll deselect this one, the red shape, by shift-clicking on it, and then I'll press the D key so that we can see that we've got two shapes right here. So we've got this kind of C shape that's been cut away, and we have the circle that describes its interior. Don't know why that is, but that's the way it ends up working. So we get these kind of weird path artifacts in addition to the cropped intersection shape. All right, now I'll go ahead and select these shapes down here in the lower left corner, and I'll click on Outline. Outline really does a number of things. First of all, it gets rid of the fills, and it turns the fills into strokes, and it sets the line weight to 0 points, which is of no value. So I'll go ahead and increase that line weight value to, let's say, 6 points here. Then I'll press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on a Mac in order to ungroup the shapes, and I'll show them to you. Notice that they're all open path outlines. This is the only Pathfinder operation that results in open path outlines, by the way. So it's a kind of further deterioration of the paths from what we saw with Divide. All right, now I'll select this final group down here. And notice that we've got the inset square again, and that's because I'm going to show you minus back. Now, this is the opposite of that Pathfinder we saw earlier, minus front. Instead of subtracting the forward shapes, it subtracts the rear shapes from a single forward shape, which means that we're going to subtract everything from that inset yellow square in order to create this effect here. All right, these next two examples are just designed to show you what Pathfinder operations do with a couple of different path variations. Pathfinder operations tend to really like closed-filled paths. So in this case, we've got closed paths, but they're stroked with no fills. And you'll see that that makes trim not work at all. So you'll just get a warning telling you it's not going to do anything. Same with merge. Merge is not going to play ball with this at all. And then crop just ends up completely malfunctioning. So you can see here, we end up with the ring, but the fill and stroke went away, and it's as if crop couldn't even see the square in the background. There was nothing for it to crop, so it just kept these pieces here. Things get worse when you start working with open path outlines. So in this case, both trim and merge are going to complain. They're not going to play ball. Also, minus back is not going to like it. It's just going to tell you it refuses to work, end of story. And divide, in this case, is going to totally malfunction. As soon as I click on it, you can see that we end up with, what in the world is this? We didn't even divide away the pieces of the ring that were outside the square. We didn't keep the corner of the square because those were the areas where the openings were. I'll undo the application of divide by pressing Control-Z or Command-Z a couple of times, and then I'll apply something that will work, exclude. But even then, anything that does work on these paths, with the exception of outline, is going to generate closed path outlines when it's done. So that's your big overarching introduction to the Pathfinder operations in Illustrator. In future movies, I'll show you some practical applications.